Many Medicines is recorded on Treaty 8 territory, the unceded lands of the Métis and the homelands of the Cree and Dene peoples. It is an honor to live and work upon these lands, and through this podcast we commit to uplifting Indigenous voices, sharing stories with respect, and walking in a good way with both the community and the land. Tansei, hello and welcome to Many Medicines, the intersection of art, culture, and healing. My name is Stacy Grant, and I am a Métis artist and educator here in Nistawayu, also known as Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo in northeastern Alberta. I created this podcast as a way to make a space where stories are served and honored rather than extracted. I thought it was important for youth to be able to have a place that they could look to, where maybe there was a path that they're walking where they needed to see that reflected, or even just to see somebody looking like them. Thank you for being here, and enjoy the show. Tansei, thank you so much for coming and being on the show today. Would you like to introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what role you play in the community?
My name is Leona English. I've lived here off and on since 1973. I'm originally born in Uranium City, Saskatchewan. Grew up half of the time up in Fort McMurray. Spent a lot of time in the trapline as I was growing up, as my parents homeschooled me while we were in the trapping season. So I've never finished a full year in school.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Because half was in the trap lines. My father was the one that did homeschooling for me. My mother did not really read and write, although that she spoke very good English and also the Cree language. And I also learned the Cree language. I don't speak it very well, but I do understand it very well.
Very cool. So do you find that it was very formative for you, where you spent so much time on the trapline as a young child and as a young woman?
I think spending so much time in a trapline and learning the traditional way of life as a Métis family, because my parents were Métis, so I learned a lot of their traditions and their ways of doing things. So I think it shaped me into who I am today.
Yeah, I think so too, where you are someone where in the community I find that people do go to, because you also have this kind of peaceful presence about you. Don't get me wrong, you're no nonsense. You don't sugarcoat things, but you're someone where you do have a very open heart and you're willing to share this knowledge as well, if that makes any sense, where you want people to learn.
I think it's very important for us to share our knowledge and the future generations of our young people coming, because as us elders die and pass away, or whatever happens, whatever becomes of us, a lot of that knowledge dies with us.
Yeah.
And then this way, if we can share it to others, it goes on, it lives on, right?
Yeah, for sure. Do you find that when you think back to when you were a child, is there anything where you wish that you had been able to learn different things, where now that you are an elder and you're playing that role in the community, are there questions that you wish that you would have asked, but when we're kids we don't really maybe know the significance or know what we're seeking?
Very much so. I'm so glad that you touched on that subject, because when I was young, I thought, no, I'm never going to do this. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. And now I wish I had taken the time to learn more of the things, because my great-grandmother was very into like the local herbs and the different things that, that they could be used for, like cough syrups and living on a trap line. Well, you don't have 5 minutes to run to the store. You have miles to go to get anything.
Yeah.
And she used to make all sorts of herbal medicine just out of the forest. And I really wish I would have paid more attention to that when she was doing it. Yes, there's a lot of things I wish I would have paid attention to. And now later in my life here, they could have been very useful, and maybe that was a knowledge that I could have passed on to my grandchildren as well, and others.
But one of the things I admire the most about you too is that you are open to learning, where we had a conversation right before Christmas, I think, where you said, you're someone where you're open to learning every day. None of us know everything, right? So when you look at, the youth today and stuff, what kind of advice would you give them for being able to ask those questions and being able to get knowledge while they're young? Because while we can learn our whole life, sometimes it's handy to have the stage set for us when we're younger to be able to carry it forward, right?
For sure. I think for our youth, if it's in their mind and they think about it, ask, because there are no wrong answers. There's only knowledge to be learned from it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
If they're willing to learn something, I am more than happy, to show them of what I learned and what I can pass on to them, and or if that's something that could be, like my granddaughters right now, 2 of them, they're into beading.
Yeah.
And they come to me, and I am very, very happy to help them.
Yeah.
And that whereas I grew up, moving into the city, well, I lost a bit of that, right?
Oh, okay.
Getting away from the trapline and getting away from how things were done back then. And I still continue quite a bit of it. Like canning and like going out into the bush and harvesting, things like that. I think it's great.
Yeah, for sure. How did you find that shift happened for you when you did move? How old were you when you moved back to the city from the trapline?
I was 17.
Oh, okay.
And that is when I also got married.
Oh, okay.
3 days after I turned 18.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then my son came along, and so, and then even with my husband, we still went back to the trapline. I still spent a lot of time in the trapline, but the sewing part of it was not as much as it was when I was living at home, because my mother, that's what she did for money. She sewed, right? She made hides, and that is something I wish I would have learned.
Yeah.
Nowadays to buy a moose hide is like $3,000, and she used to do them up. It's just never ever bought a hide for her crafts, right?
And is she someone where you learned most of your skills from now? Where you're a very respected bead worker and material arts here in the community, so she taught you that?
Yes. I'm very thankful for the knowledge that I got from her for sewing, and then of course practice makes perfect, right?
Yeah.
Sure. and nobody's perfect, and everybody's artwork is a piece of them, right? And that's what they do. And then, like I said, I like learning new things. For sure.
Yeah. How do you find that in the community we're kind of able to enable one another with knowledge? What do you find helps to make it so that we can share that with one another?
Well, with the craft classes that the Métis does, well, a lot of it, different people come with different ideas, and other people learn from that, and we share what knowledge that we have. I think those are great programs.
I think so too.
Yes.
And I think it's something where it's nice when everyone can sit in a space, and we'll have a facilitator, sure, but you can look at the person next to you and ask a question. Where I think a lot of it is being open to that sharing, instead of sometimes I think that there's a fear to not share, even if it's within our community. where it's kind of like, oh, well, I worked hard for this knowledge. And like, how would you maybe encourage somebody to be open to encouraging others, even if it's not them directly being the teacher?
I think it's important for us to share our knowledge. You know, I mean, we didn't come across it ourselves. Somebody else took their time to teach us how to do these things. I think it's important that we pass it on to others. You know, because if we keep it to ourselves, you know, then it goes nowhere. Like, it's not shared, it's not showed. You know, it's not displayed anywhere.
Yeah.
I think displaying our artwork, you know, regardless if it's beading or knitting or anything like that, I think it's important that we share.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, and it's a piece where I had Knowledge Keeper Claire Antoine on a few episodes ago, and she had talked about the amount of time it takes for knowledge to be lost. And I think she said that it was 1 to 2 generations, where it's, you know, with COVID, everybody started planting gardens again. They were saying, like, why is my potato plant falling over? But there had been 1 or 2 generations of people where they were never taught to hill their potatoes while it grows. So I think that's where a lot of the knowledge sharing becomes so important, is because even if we just have one generation that is a lost generation, and when we look at Indigenous communities, in a lot of ways, we have many generations where there has been a disconnect because of whether it's colonization or different pieces. Now it's kind of what we do have. I think it's important to be able to teach others in our community with that knowledge.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100% on that one, because it's like you said, like, even as much as doing a garden, you know, I mean, there is a task to make those poor little things grow.
Yeah.
And which I still do that today, even though that I grow half of my stuff on my deck. But, but I do plant a decent sized garden in my home.
Good.
Yeah. I have potatoes in pots, carrots in pots, onions, and my cucumbers, and I don't have enough space for cabbage and turnips.
Yeah, that's a good 3 feet per. Yeah, is that something where on the trapline, I know that like my granny had a garden. Was that something that you guys always had as well? Yes,
we always had gardens, and because we lived on the Athabasca River, like, we had huge gardens, and then there used to be a general store down on the Athabasca River, and my husband and I used to grow potatoes and onions for them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and every year we used to pull 1,000 pounds of potatoes out of our garden and probably about 75 onions.
Yeah.
And then he used to sell them. Back in those days, it was only $6 for 100 pounds of potatoes.
$6.
$6. That's all he got. And that was in the late 70s. And nowadays, you can't even get a tiny little bag for $6.
Yeah, no, not at all. Well, and that's not even considering the labor that goes into it.
The labor
right?
that goes into it, yes.
Because out there, it was hauling water and stuff too. Don't get me wrong, being on the bank, there's a certain saturation that comes from it, but, you know, you still need to take care of it in a certain way.
Oh, yeah, you still, but he built water trenches.
Oh, wow.
Because we had a creek that was running, and then he dug out a trench, and just with a fire canvas, you know, the fire hoses, and then he ran it on the bank, and he cut holes in the fire hose, and
that's so smart.
And then that's how we got water for the gardens.
Very cool. Adaptability, innovation.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Oh, yeah, he was really handy with things like that.
Yeah. Are there any other things you can think of where it was kind of your family had to look at the land and figure out how to, like, okay, how do we work with this? Right? How do we adapt to it versus trying to change it?
I didn't pay so much attention to things like that because that was more his field. I was more in the weeding and the planting stage mostly, and the taking care of the gardens and that. But I mean, all winter long, we used to save potato peelings and eggshells, and then he would get fish in the winter. He'd freeze dry the fish.
Oh, okay.
And then we would ground those up, and he'd put those in the garden for fertilizer.
Oh, that's so smart.
You know, and every year we used to, and that used to be, I used to hate that part of the job because it smelled bad, right?
Yeah.
But then you had good produce out of it too. So I mean, there was, because I don't know, his parents owned the trap line long before I ever came along there, so it was well established.
Oh, okay.
By the time I got married into that family, right? So the gardens were already there, and you know, the water thing wasn't. I mean, that's something that we did. And I wish I had brought photos of that.
Yeah. If you have any photos, you can send them to me after.
Yeah.
And I can match them up throughout, and then I think that would be really beautiful, where it's,
it would be.
You know, I think it's a wonderful thing where you do have these memories and you are willing to share them, but also having that photo recollection where I know for me, I have very few photos of like my parents' lives and, you know, my granny and my grandpa's life from when they were younger and when they were on the trap line. And there's something where even though I was never there, I feel such a deep connection to that space when I look at a photo.
Yeah, well, you never really lose that's one thing I found, even with me, you never really lose the connection to the past knowledge that you have learned from that, because it's still in with you, right? You know, and you still can share it.
So is there anything where, when you look at living on the trap line as well, you said that you guys used fish for fertilizer. Was fishing a big part of being on the trap line as well?
Not so much. We've never stored fish because we've never had dog teams, right?
Gotcha.
All we had was 2 dogs for a pet. They were just pets.
Okay.
So we've never, other than like, okay, yeah, let's get some fish, and you know, they're likely for dinner or whatever. But we've never really. We were more into moose and things, because every fall we used to he would get a moose, and I would can anywhere between 100 to 150 jars of moose meat.
Oh, wow.
Every fall, right? And we used to do them right outside on an open pit fire with the galvanized wash tubs.
Oh, wow. Okay,
Yeah,
so then you did the pressure canning
Yeah,
inside.
we did the pressure canning that way.
Yeah.
And then like for the vegetables and that, well, I did them in a pressure canner inside the house, right?
Very cool.
Which I still have the pressure canner at home that I keep for, I don't know if it's still usable, but I keep it anyway.
Yeah, sentimental purposes, right? Sometimes you got to keep things for the memories, I think.
Yeah,
and
you know, so I used to can carrots, I used to can potatoes and onions.
Yeah.
And then we also had the pickled carrots, the pickled beets, and the homemade sauerkraut. You know, I'd love to do that again.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know, to make the sauerkraut, but it's a very timely process.
Yeah, for sure. And it's stinky.
The cabbage is not too bad.
No, okay.
No, the cabbage is not too bad.
Good.
But the amount of salt that goes into it, you know, nowadays, well, you know, people cut back on. Well, you know, we're more calorie-wise, I think, as we get older. But then back in those days, we didn't have processed food unless we made it ourselves, right?
Yeah.
You know, we go to a farmer, buy a pig, but cure your own ham. And so the processed food was So, and then people lived a lot healthier back then.
Yeah, I was going to say there was a lot more movement where I feel like the calories wouldn't necessarily matter because you always had to be moving and had to be working, right?
You know, it was a chore every day. You know, you didn't get to sit in a house and turn the dishwasher on to get your dishes done. You had to physically do these things. And then the wood runs and the cutting of the wood in the fall. My son Mike used to hate that.
Yeah.
You know? Oh yeah, because he'd be out in the bush and we used to cut all in the end of August and September is when we used to do all our wood cutting. And then in the spring he used to peel trees and leave them sit out there so that they would dry, you know. And then there's always the berry picking, the harvesting. You know, because we never ever did buy a store-bought jar of jam. I never even knew what a store-bought jar of jam tasted like until I moved here in Fort McMurray in the 80s, because I canned all our own, right? And which I still do a lot of that. I still can all my own jams and fruits.
It's something too where I've seen that with all this work that you do within your own life and being able to sustain your family, you've also shared those teachings with the community, where I believe you've done a Bannock class as well. You've done a canning class. You did beadwork ornaments this year, which I was so disappointed that I couldn't go to, but she made these beautiful little like moccasin ornaments where you'll have to send me a photo of those ones too, and I'll put it in because they were so cute. So beautiful.
Yeah, they maxed out on that one. 20 was the one we had. We had 35 that signed up for that class.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Because like I said, you are very respected for your talent and the way you teach. And it's just the products that you create are just remarkable. And we'll put video clips, like I said, in here too of Leona brought some mittens and gloves. So we'll put those in so that you can see. But it's just your eye for detail. I can tell that the teachings and the practice that you have put into it, it's something where it really does resonate with you, and you do take it very, very seriously, for lack of a better word, where it's, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So with your beadwork and your sewing and even your gardening, your canning, would you say that those are a medicine for you?
They are. They're, beading and sewing is my relaxed time. You know, I clear my mind, and the only thing I concentrate is just on the sewing and the canning and even the picking berries, going out into the land and enjoying the land. And I never leave the land without giving back of what I've taken. I think that's very important for us as Indigenous people to continue on that as a tradition. Like if I go pick berries in a patch, like it's not necessarily that we have tobacco, but since I'm a smoker, I always have it with me, right?
Yeah.
And as I leave, you know, I do say a little simple prayer. Thank you very much for what you offered me, and this is what I'm offering you, and then I leave. You know, because I don't go back to that patch because I have nothing left to pick in there because I already cleaned it out.
Yeah.
You know, and then I pick probably within, I would say, about 150-kilometer radius around here, because I go all the way as far as Conklin, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So where do you feel, where it sounds like, you know, you're from did you say Uranium?
Uranium City, Saskatchewan is where I was born.
Yeah, so then when you came here and you've kind of been here off and on, would you say that the land does feel like home with the amount of time that you have been here now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The land is, the way that I look at it, the land will accept you with open arms. If you respect the land, it'll give. You know, it'll give to you. Don't abuse it.
Yeah.
You know, like some of the places I've been, I always have garbage bags in my vehicle, and a lot of times I end up picking up garbage first before I even start picking, because that's not respecting the land, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's the same concept. You respect people, and same thing, you have to respect the land as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to me, no matter where I go, I think the land welcomes me as I welcome it.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about that one.
I honestly feel similarly, where the way that I kind of view our role as humans in the world is that it's not a hierarchy where humans are at the top.
No.
I really believe that everything around us, we are kin and we are all connected, and the way that we treat it is the way that we kind of get treated in return, where if we don't take care of the plants, we don't take care of the animals, then they can't provide for us as well. So it needs to be a reciprocity cycle.
Yeah.
Where I talk about sometimes where I lived in BC for a little while, and my thing has always been the plants. I love the plants. My granny taught me plants. My mom taught me plants. And I went to BC and I was just like, oh my gosh, it's all different.
Like, they have very different plants.
Yeah, like it was just so, and I was just like, oh, I don't know anything. But they have a different rose where I can't remember what it's called right now, but they have their version of like the wild rose. And it's just another branch off of it. And it was just that feeling of familiarity where I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to be here to learn this though.
Yeah.
Right, where I just needed to be in the headspace of, like you said, I am welcomed here. Because I think I've always struggled with feeling like I don't belong in a space, where I've never really felt a belonging until maybe becoming a mom, honestly. Right, so being able to find that in reciprocity with the land and with our Métis community has meant a lot to me, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Yeah.
You know, the Métis, they have a lot to offer, I find, and I've learned a lot from them. Like, I've been a Métis all my life, and I've grown up that way, and you know, there's the other cultures, and I'm always open to learn about the other cultures as well. And because I think they have different teachings.
Yeah.
You know, and just like the ribbon skirts, for the longest time in my life, I didn't think the ribbon skirts were part of my tradition, but they are. You know, and it's just something that you learn over time with different cultures, right?
Yeah.
Because I lived in British Columbia for 14 years as well.
Oh, okay.
So, unless, like you mentioned, the plants, there's so many different plants, and they have different herbal plants. Like, they have the wild eucalyptus trees over there that you can actually extract the oil from the bark.
Very cool.
And then there was a native that taught me how to do that. You know, you boil the bark.
Okay.
And then you skim the oil off of it, and then you have pure eucalyptus oil.
Very cool.
You know?
Yeah.
And I had made some of it while I was out there.
Yeah.
And it's a very strong fragrance that you get out of that. But you know, it's just like you said, different places, different things, right?
Well, and it's the way that we're so influenced by the land that's around us. Where another conversation I had previously with Claire, she talked about even when we're looking at someone who's like Woods Cree versus Plains Cree. And like, if you put someone who only grew up in the woods and the plains, they'd be like, I don't know what to do. How do I survive out here? And then, you know, vice versa, someone who's used to maybe, you know, hunting where it's wide open spaces, all of a sudden you're surrounded by trees.
Yeah.
And you can't see 20 feet in front of you. So the way that our different practices kind of developed through all of our communities is based on how our families and our ancestors before us and our communities interacted with the land that we were on. And, you know, it's very recent that we do have, I guess, the privilege to be able to travel so freely.
Yes.
Right. So,
you know, traveling makes it so much easier nowadays. Now, unlike back in in those days, I mean, it's just like, even just for myself, my very first vehicle didn't have power windows or air conditioning or anything like that.
Yeah.
But you know what? We survived in 40 degrees heat and we were fine.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, we can't.
Yeah.
Or I feel like I can't.
Yeah, yeah.
But
we're used to having that level of privilege and comfort.
Exactly.
Right.
So with, and that changes in time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, for sure.